The dust of the Montana Territory stirred beneath Kathleen Turner's boots as she ran through the darkness, her heart pounding with each desperate step. The year was 1878, and the moonlight cast long shadows across the prairie as she fled from the life she could no longer bear. Behind her lay Copper Creek, a town that had once promised prosperity but had become her prison. Ahead of her lay uncertainty, danger, and the slim chance of freedom. Her breathing came in ragged gasps as she paused at the crest of a small hill, looking back at the distant glow of lanterns. They were coming for her. She knew they would. In Copper Creek, a woman didn't simply walk away from her husband, especially not when that husband was Harold Blackfield, the town's most prominent businessman and secretly its most dangerous criminal. "Just keep moving," Kathleen whispered to herself, clutching the small bundle of possessions she'd managed to grab before escaping. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal of her mother's locket, the only thing of value she'd brought besides a few dollars and a change of clothes. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made her blood run cold. They'd found her trail sooner than she'd expected. With renewed panic, she scrambled down the hillside, making for the cover of a nearby copse of trees. If she could reach the river beyond, perhaps she could throw them off her scent. As she neared the tree line, a shadowy figure emerged from behind the thick trunk of a cottonwood. Kathleen froze, her eyes wide with terror. "Madam," a deep voice said softly, "you're making enough noise to wake the dead." The man stepped into a patch of moonlight, revealing a tall frame topped with a wide-brimmed hat. His face was partially obscured by the shadow it cast, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble. "Please," she whispered, "I can't go back, they'll kill me." The man tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Who's they?" "Blackfield's men. My husband," she corrected herself, "my former husband and his associates. I've seen what they do, I know too much." The distant hoofbeats grew louder. The stranger glanced in their direction before returning his gaze to Kathleen. "Name's Daniel Hayes," he said, reaching for the reins of a horse she hadn't noticed in the shadows, "and it seems to me you could use a ride. Why would you help me? You don't know me." "Let's just say I'm not fond of Blackfield myself," Daniel said, swinging up into his saddle and extending his hand. "And I've never been one to leave a lady in distress." Kathleen hesitated only a moment before taking his hand and allowing him to pull her up behind him. As she settled onto the horse, the voices of her pursuers became clearer. "When they catch me," she whispered against his back, "they'll hang me for leaving." Daniel Hayes turned slightly in his saddle, his eyes meeting hers in the darkness. "Then I'll cut the rope myself," he whispered back, before spurring his horse into motion. They rode hard through the night, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main trails. Daniel seemed to know these lands intimately, guiding his horse through terrain that would be treacherous to most riders, especially in the dark. Kathleen clung to his back, the warmth of him a stark contrast to the cool night air. Dawn was breaking when they finally stopped beside a small creek. Daniel dismounted first, then helped Kathleen down. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, stiff from the long ride and weak from fear and exhaustion. "You should rest," Daniel said, leading his horse to water. "We're far enough ahead now to take a short break." Kathleen sank down onto a flat rock near the creek's edge. "Where are we going?" "I have a cabin," Daniel replied, removing his hat to run a hand through his dark hair. "It's about another day's ride from here. Not much, but it's secluded. You'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next." Kathleen studied him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with intense blue eyes that stood out against his sun-darkened skin. His clothing was that of a working cowboy, worn but well cared for, with a gun belt that looked well used but not ostentatious. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again. "And don't tell me it's just because you don't like Blackfield." Half the territory doesn't like him, but they wouldn't risk crossing him. Daniel crouched by the creek, splashing water on his face before answering. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to need to escape something, and Blackfield, he and I have history." "What kind of history?" "The kind that's better left buried," he said, standing and shaking water from his hands. "For now, all you need to know is that I'll get you somewhere safe." Kathleen wanted to press further, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking her. She'd been planning her escape for weeks, hardly sleeping, constantly looking over her shoulder. Now that she had put some distance between herself and Copper Creek, her body was demanding rest. "Sleep for a bit," Daniel said, noticing her drooping eyelids. "I'll keep watch." Despite her wariness of this stranger, Kathleen found herself trusting him enough to close her eyes. She curled up on the soft grass near the rock, using her bundle as a pillow, and fell into a fitful sleep. When she awoke, the sun was high in the sky. Daniel was sitting on a nearby log, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. He glanced up when she stirred. "Feel better?" he asked. Kathleen sat up, pushing her long auburn hair away from her face. "How long was I asleep?" "Few hours," Daniel replied, pocketing his knife and the small wooden figure he'd been carving. "We should get moving soon. Your husband's men might be persistent." "They will be," Kathleen said grimly, getting to her feet. "Harold doesn't let anything go, especially not things he considers his property." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're not property." "In Harold's mind, I am," she said, splashing water from the creek onto her face. "I made the mistake of marrying him 2 years ago when he seemed like a respectable businessman. By the time I realized what he really was, it was too late." "And what is he really?" Daniel asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Kathleen straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "A monster. He runs most of the illegal operations in the territory, smuggling protection rackets worse. The sheriff is in his pocket, along with half the territorial officials and anyone who crosses him." She trailed off, the memories of what she'd seen making her shudder. "You saw something you weren't supposed to," Daniel guessed. Kathleen nodded. "I found his ledgers. Names, dates, amounts, evidence of everything he's done. And then last week, I overheard him planning to eliminate a federal marshal who's been investigating him. When he realized I knew." She swallowed hard. "I had to leave. I couldn't be part of it anymore." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. "Did you take the ledgers?" "No," she said with regret. "I couldn't get to them. They're in his office safe, but I memorized some of it enough to be dangerous to him." "Then we need to get you to someone who can help," Daniel said, moving to prepare his horse. "There's a federal judge in Helena who might listen." "Helena's over 100 miles from here," Kathleen pointed out. Daniel offered a small smile. "Then we'd better get riding." They traveled more cautiously during daylight, staying off the main trails and keeping to the cover of forests and ravines when possible. Daniel was quiet for most of the journey, but not unfriendly. He shared his jerky and hardtack with her at midday and occasionally pointed out landmarks or wildlife as they rode. As the sun began to set, Kathleen found herself studying the back of his head, wondering about this mysterious man who had appeared just when she needed help most. "How do you know this area so well?" she asked as they navigated through a particularly dense stretch of pine forest. "I was a scout for the cavalry for a few years," Daniel replied. "Got to know most of the territory between here and the Dakotas." "You're not with them anymore," he shook his head. "No, decided I preferred working on my own terms, did some cattle driving, some hunting. Now I mostly keep to myself." "And somehow still manage to cross paths with Harold Blackfield," Kathleen observed. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Your husband has a habit of leaving victims in his wake. One of them was my brother." Kathleen's breath caught. "I'm sorry." "It was 3 years ago." James was working as a guard for a gold shipment. Blackfield's men hit the convoy. 5 men died, including James. The official report called it bandits unknown, but in these parts everyone knew who was really behind it. "You couldn't prove it," Kathleen guessed. "No, and without proof." Daniel let the thought hang in the air. As night fell, they reached a small clearing near a rocky outcropping. Daniel suggested they make camp, as pushing the horse too hard in the dark could lead to injury. He efficiently set up a small, nearly smokeless fire and laid out a bedroll for Kathleen. His quiet competence was reassuring after the chaos of her flight from Copper Creek. "Tell me about yourself," Daniel said as they sat by the fire, sharing a tin cup of coffee. Before Blackfield, Kathleen wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I grew up in St. Louis. My father was a schoolteacher, my mother a seamstress. They both died in a fever outbreak when I was 19. I came west 2 years later looking for a new start, and found Blackfield instead," Daniel said. Kathleen nodded. "He was charming at first, attentive. Seemed to be a successful businessman with connections and respect. It wasn't until after the wedding that I began to see glimpses of the real man beneath the facade." "How did you handle it?" "I tried to make the best of it," she admitted. "Focused on charitable work in town, kept my head down. But the more I saw, the harder it became to ignore, and then when I found out about his plans for the marshal." She shook her head. "I couldn't be complicit anymore." Daniel studied her across the fire, his expression thoughtful. "That took courage." "Or desperation," she replied with a wry smile. "I'm still not sure I'll survive this." "You will," Daniel said with quiet confidence. "We'll reach my cabin tomorrow. You can rest there while I make arrangements to get you to Helena safely." That night, Kathleen slept better than she had in months, despite the hard ground beneath her. Something about Daniel's presence made her feel secure for the first time since realizing what kind of man she had married. The next day's journey took them deeper into the wilderness, following game trails and crossing streams that would help hide their tracks. By mid-afternoon, they crested a ridge and Daniel pointed to a small valley below. "There it is," he said. "Home, such as it is." The cabin was nestled against the base of a cliff, partially hidden by tall pines. It was small but solidly built, with a corral for horses and what looked like a garden plot to one side. As they approached, Kathleen could see that, while modest, the cabin showed signs of care. The roof was in good repair, the windows intact, and a neat stack of firewood lined one wall. Inside was similarly spare but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors that presumably led to sleeping quarters. Everything was clean and orderly. "It's not much," Daniel said, watching her take in the space, "but it's private. No one comes out this way." "It's perfect," Kathleen said honestly. After the opulent but cold mansion she'd shared with Blackfield, the cabin's simple warmth was welcoming. Daniel showed her to a small bedroom, which he explained had belonged to his brother when he occasionally stayed. "You can rest here. I'll take care of the horse and get us something to eat." Left alone, Kathleen sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the tension of the past days begin to ebb away. For the first time since fleeing Copper Creek, she allowed herself to believe she might actually escape Harold's reach. Over the next few days, Kathleen and Daniel fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. He taught her about the surrounding area, showing her which plants were edible, how to identify animal tracks, and basic survival skills she might need. In return, Kathleen helped around the cabin, cooking meals from Daniel's stores and the game he brought back, mending clothes and tending to the small garden. They talked during these tasks, learning more about each other's lives before circumstances had thrown them together. On the 4th evening, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset, Daniel brought up the subject they'd both been avoiding. "We need to talk about getting you to Helena," he said. "I've been thinking about the safest route." Kathleen nodded, though the idea of leaving the cabin and Daniel brought an unexpected pang of regret. "How far is it from here?" "About a week's journey if we're careful," Daniel replied. "We'll need to avoid towns where Blackfield might have eyes. That means longer routes, more wilderness travel." "When do you think we should leave?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "That's the thing, I'm not sure I should go with you." Kathleen turned to him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Blackfield knows me," Daniel explained. "If his men spot us together, they'll know exactly who you're with. You might be safer traveling with someone without a history with him." "Who did you have in mind?" Kathleen asked, a hint of apprehension in her voice. "There's a Paiute family about half a day's ride from here," Joseph Eagle has guided for the army before. He knows the territory even better than I do, and he has no connection to Blackfield. He could get you to Helena safely." Kathleen stood up abruptly, walking to the edge of the porch. "So you're just going to hand me off to a stranger, after everything?" Daniel rose as well, moving to stand beside her. "Kathleen, I'm trying to think of what's safest for you. And you think sending me away with someone I don't know is safer than staying with the one person who's actually helped me?" She turned to face him, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. Daniel's expression softened. "That's not it, if anything happened to you because of your connection to me, I made my choice when I ran from Harold," Kathleen interrupted. "I know the risks, and right now the only person I trust in this world is you, Daniel Hayes." The intensity in her voice seemed to catch him off guard. They stood looking at each other as the last rays of sunlight painted the valley in gold and shadow. "Kathleen," Daniel said softly, his voice rough with emotion. Before he could continue, the distant sound of a horse's whinny broke the moment. Daniel's posture immediately changed, alert and tense. "Get inside," he said quietly, reaching for the rifle that leaned against the cabin wall. "That wasn't my horse." Kathleen's heart began to race as she quickly moved into the cabin. Daniel followed, closing the door quietly behind them. "Could it be your friend, the guide?" she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "Joseph would have called out by now. He knows better than to approach unannounced." He moved to the window, carefully peering out without exposing himself. "3 riders," he murmured. "Coming up the valley." "Blackfield's men?" Kathleen asked, fear making her voice tremble. "Maybe." Daniel turned to her. "There's a cellar under the floor in the pantry, hidden door under the rug. Get down there and don't make a sound, no matter what you hear." "I'm not hiding while you face them alone," Kathleen protested. Daniel took her by the shoulders, his blue eyes intense. "Kathleen, please. If it's Blackfield's men, they'll kill us both if they find you here. The cellar connects to a tunnel that leads out to the woods. If things go bad, you can escape that way." The sound of the approaching riders grew louder. Kathleen wanted to argue, but the urgency in Daniel's expression stopped her. "Promise me you'll follow if you can," she said. "I promise," he replied, and for a brief moment, his hand cupped her cheek. "Now go." Kathleen hurried to the pantry, finding the rug and lifting it to reveal a trapdoor with a recessed iron ring. She pulled it open to find a ladder leading down into darkness. "There's a lantern and matches at the bottom," Daniel whispered from behind her, "and a bag with provisions. The tunnel entrance is behind the wine rack." Kathleen turned and impulsively grabbed his shirt, pulling him down to place a quick, fierce kiss on his lips. "Don't you dare die," she whispered, before climbing down into the cellar. Daniel's surprised expression was the last thing she saw before he closed the trapdoor and replaced the rug. In the darkness of the cellar, Kathleen found the lantern and lit it, keeping the flame low. The space was small but neat, with shelves of preserved food and several barrels that likely contained flour and other staples. A crude wine rack stood against one wall, just as Daniel had said. Above her, she could hear the muffled sounds of Daniel moving around the cabin, presumably preparing for the visitors. Then came the sound of horses arriving outside, followed by men's voices too indistinct to make out words. Kathleen's hands trembled as she moved to the wine rack, examining it for the secret entrance Daniel had mentioned. She found it by pushing against the back panel, which swung inward to reveal a narrow tunnel reinforced with timber supports. But she didn't enter it. Instead, she stood frozen, listening to the confrontation unfolding above. The voices grew clearer as the men apparently entered the cabin. One voice she recognized immediately: Silas Cooper, Harold's chief enforcer. The sound of it made her blood run cold. "Just passing through, Hayes," Cooper was saying, his tone falsely casual. "Tracking a fugitive. Thought you might have seen something." Daniel's reply was measured, giving nothing away. "Been keeping to myself up here, haven't seen anyone in weeks." "That right?" Cooper sounded skeptical. "Because we tracked someone heading this direction. A woman, Red hair, pretty little thing but dangerous in her way, wife of an associate of mine. Can't help you, Daniel said. Like I said, I've been alone. There was a pause, and Kathleen could imagine Cooper's cold eyes scanning the cabin for signs of her presence. Mind if we take a look around? Cooper asked, though it wasn't really a question. Actually, I do mind, Daniel replied, his tone hardening. This is my home and you weren't invited. The tension in the room above was palpable even through the floorboards. Kathleen held her breath. You know, Cooper said slowly, I remember you now. Hayes, weren't you the one causing trouble after that gold shipment robbery a few years back, making accusations? Your brother was one of the guards, wasn't he? You remember correctly, Daniel said, his voice tight. Thought so. Cooper's voice took on a dangerous edge, which makes me wonder why you'd be so unhelpful now unless you've got something to hide. Kathleen heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. I'm going to ask you once to leave my property, Daniel said calmly. After that, I can't guarantee your health. Cooper laughed, a sound devoid of humor. 3 against 1, Hayes, not good odds. I've faced worse, Daniel replied. The sudden explosion of gunfire made Kathleen gasp. There were shouts, the crash of furniture, more shots. She stood frozen in terror, wanting desperately to help but knowing she would only make things worse if she revealed herself. The firefight seemed to last forever but probably only went on for a minute or so. Then there was an eerie silence broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and slow footsteps. Check the rest of the cabin, Cooper's voice ordered, though it sounded strained. She's here somewhere. Kathleen's heart pounded as she heard the sounds of the men searching the cabin, opening doors, moving furniture. She backed into the tunnel entrance, ready to flee if they discovered the cellar. A new sound made her pause, a pained groan that she instantly recognized as Daniel's. He was alive at least, but clearly hurt. Found something, one of the men called out. Looks like women's things in this bedroom. I knew it, Cooper said triumphantly. Where is she, Hayes? Tell us now and maybe we'll make it quick for you. Daniel's reply was too low to hear clearly, but it was followed by the sound of a blow and another groan. Search everywhere, Cooper ordered. Floorboards, walls, outside. She can't have gone far. Kathleen knew she couldn't wait any longer. If they found the cellar, she would be trapped. With one last anguished look at the ceiling, she picked up the provision bag Daniel had prepared and slipped into the tunnel. Pulling the wine rack closed behind her, the tunnel was narrow and low, forcing her to crouch as she moved forward with only the dim light of her lantern to guide her. The earthen passage was surprisingly well constructed, with wooden supports every few feet and a packed dirt floor. It sloped gradually upward, heading, she assumed, toward the woods behind the cliff. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, Kathleen reached the end of the tunnel, a small opening concealed by brush. She extinguished her lantern before pushing aside the branches and emerging into the forest. The sun had set completely now, leaving the woods in darkness broken only by patches of moonlight filtering through the trees. Kathleen oriented herself, remembering the layout of the land around the cabin from her walks with Daniel. The sound of a distant shout from the direction of the cabin decided her course. She would circle around, staying hidden in the trees, and try to see what was happening. She couldn't simply flee, not without knowing if Daniel was alive or dead. Moving as quietly as she could, Kathleen made her way through the forest, grateful for Daniel's lessons on moving silently in the wilderness. As she neared the edge of the trees that surrounded the cabin clearing, she crouched low, peering cautiously toward the structure. What she saw made her blood freeze. Daniel was on his knees in the clearing before the cabin, his hands bound behind his back. Blood darkened one side of his shirt, and more trickled from a cut on his forehead. Cooper stood before him, pistol in hand, while one of his men held a lantern. The third man was nowhere to be seen, possibly still searching or perhaps wounded in the firefight. Last chance, Hayes, Cooper was saying. Where is Kathleen Turner? Daniel looked up at Cooper, his face bloodied but defiant. Go to hell, Cooper. Cooper sighed theatrically. Have it your way. He raised his pistol, aiming it at Daniel's head. Without thinking, Kathleen stood and stepped into the clearing. "Stop!" Both men turned, Cooper's face breaking into a triumphant smile when he saw her. "Well, well," he said. "Mrs. Blackfield, how kind of you to join us." "Let him go," Kathleen said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's me you want." "Kathleen, no," Daniel struggled against his bonds. "Get out of here," Cooper laughed. "Touching, but I'm afraid Mr. Hayes has made his choice." And Mr. Blackfield was very clear about what happens to those who help his wife escape. "He's not your husband anymore," Daniel spat. "She left him. She's free to go." "That's not how Mr. Blackfield sees it," Cooper replied coldly, "and his view is the only one that matters in these parts." "Please," Kathleen said, taking a step forward. "I'll go with you willingly, just let Daniel live." Cooper seemed to consider this. "You know, I might have agreed to that, but Hayes here killed one of my men in that firefight. That complicates things." The missing third man, Kathleen realized with a sinking heart. "Now," Cooper continued, "I think I'll kill him while you watch. Then we can head back to Copper Creek, where Mr. Blackfield is very eager to have a conversation with you about loyalty." Kathleen's mind raced. She had no weapon, no plan, but she couldn't let Daniel die for helping her. "If you kill him," she said desperately, "you'll never get the ledgers." Cooper paused, his attention fully on her now. "What ledgers?" "Harold's records. All his illegal dealings, names, dates, amounts. I took them before I left. They're hidden and only I know where." It was a desperate lie, but it was all she had. Cooper studied her, suspicion warring with greed in his eyes. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Kathleen met his gaze steadily. "Kill Daniel and you'll never know for sure." "And how do you think Harold will react when he learns you might have lost the only chance to recover evidence that could hang him?" Doubt crept into Cooper's expression. Harold Blackfield was not known for his forgiveness of failure. "Where are these ledgers?" he demanded. "Safe," Kathleen replied, "and they'll stay that way until Daniel is free and unharmed." Cooper lowered his guns slightly, clearly rethinking his approach. "Fine. We'll all ride back to Copper Creek together. You can give the ledgers to Mr. Blackfield personally." "Untie Daniel first," Kathleen insisted. Cooper smirked. "You're not in a position to make demands, Mrs. Blackfield. I'm the only one who knows where the ledgers are," she countered. "That puts me in exactly the position to make demands." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then Cooper nodded to his remaining man. "Untie him, but if either of them tries anything, shoot them both." The man moved to untie Daniel's hands while Cooper kept his gun trained on them. As soon as he was free, Daniel rose unsteadily to his feet, his eyes never leaving Kathleen's face. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "I couldn't leave you," she replied simply. "How touching," Cooper interrupted. "Now, let's all get on our horses," and the crack of a rifle shot shattered the night. Cooper's remaining man crumpled to the ground, a look of surprise frozen on his face. Cooper spun around, his gun swinging wildly as he searched for the source of the shot. A second shot rang out and Cooper staggered, dropping his pistol as blood bloomed on his shoulder. He fell to his knees, clutching the wound and cursing. From the edge of the clearing opposite Kathleen, 3 figures emerged from the trees. The leader, a tall Native American man with a rifle, approached cautiously, keeping his weapon trained on Cooper. "Joseph," Daniel called out, relief evident in his voice. "Your timing is impeccable. Saw the smoke from your chimney this morning," Joseph Eagle replied, his English perfect but accented. "Decided to check on you, spotted these men on the trail and followed them." He gestured to the 2 men with him, a younger Native American man and an older white man with a silver beard. "My son Thomas and Mr. Wallace from the trading post." Cooper, still on his knees, glared up at them. "You're all dead," he spat. "When Blackfield hears about this, he won't hear anything from you," Joseph interrupted calmly. He turned to Daniel. "What do you want to do with him?" Daniel looked at Cooper with cold eyes. "Tie him up. We'll take him to Helena with us. Let him face a federal judge for once instead of Blackfield's corrupt local law." As Joseph's son moved to secure Cooper, Daniel turned to Kathleen, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" "I should be asking you that," she said, moving to his side and gently examining the wound on his forehead. "You're hurt." "Nothing serious," he assured her, though he winced when she touched a particularly tender spot. "The bullet just grazed my side. I've had worse from breaking horses." "I thought," Kathleen's voice caught, "when I heard the gunfire, I thought I'd lost you." Daniel's hand came up to cup her cheek, much as he had done before she descended into the cellar. "I'm harder to kill than that. I couldn't leave you," she whispered. "Not after everything, not after." She trailed off, suddenly aware of the others watching them. Daniel smiled slightly. "Not after what?" Instead of answering, Kathleen rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, this time in a real kiss rather than the desperate, fleeting one from before. After a moment of surprise, Daniel responded, his arm wrapping around her waist to pull her closer. When they finally broke apart, Joseph was watching them with amusement. "Perhaps we should give you two a moment," he suggested. "No," Daniel said, though his eyes remained on Kathleen. "We need to move. Cooper might have more men in the area." "What about the ledgers?" Wallace asked, looking at Kathleen curiously. She looked away, embarrassed. "There aren't any. I made that up to distract Cooper." "Quick thinking," Daniel said appreciatively. "But you're right, we need to get to Helena. You have information about Blackfield's operations that could finally bring him down, with or without ledgers." Joseph nodded. "We can help you get there safely. I know routes even Blackfield's men won't find." Within an hour, they had gathered what supplies they could salvage from the cabin and were ready to depart. Cooper, bound and gagged, was secured on one of the horses, with Wallace keeping a close eye on him. As they prepared to leave, Kathleen found a moment alone with Daniel by the cabin door. "I'm sorry about your home," she said, looking at the damage from the firefight. "Will you come back here after Helena?" Daniel looked thoughtful. "I'm not sure. This place was a refuge after James died, somewhere to lick my wounds and hide from the world, but now—" He looked at her. "Now I'm thinking I might want something different." "What kind of something?" Kathleen asked, her heart quickening. "The kind that involves not being alone," he said softly. "If that's something you might want too." Kathleen felt a smile spread across her face. "I think that sounds like exactly what I want." Daniel returned her smile, then grew serious. "But first, we need to deal with Blackfield. What you know could finally bring him to justice for what he did to my brother, to you, to countless others. It won't be easy, though. He'll fight back with everything he has." "I know," Kathleen said, her resolve strengthening. "But I'm not afraid anymore, not with you beside me." "Always," Daniel promised, taking her hand in his. Joseph called to them that it was time to leave. As they mounted their horses, Kathleen took one last look at the cabin, the place where she had found safety and, unexpectedly, the beginnings of something she had never truly had with Harold. Love built on trust and respect. The journey to Helena was arduous but uneventful, thanks to Joseph's knowledge of the territory. They traveled mostly at night, keeping to remote trails and avoiding settlements where Blackfield might have influence. During their journey, Kathleen and Daniel grew closer, sharing their hopes and fears around campfires while the others kept watch. He told her about his dreams before James's death of building a proper ranch, raising horses. She spoke of her childhood in St. Louis, her love of books, her hope to someday teach as her father had. "Maybe we could do both," Daniel suggested one night, his voice low as they sat slightly apart from the others. "A ranch with a proper library, maybe even a small school for the children in the area." "Children." Kathleen teased. "You're planning quite far ahead, Mr. Hayes." The firelight caught the flush on his cheeks. "I just meant I know what you meant," she said, taking his hand, "and I like the sound of it." Upon reaching Helena, they went directly to the federal courthouse, where Judge William Hollister listened gravely to Kathleen's testimony about Blackfield's criminal empire. Cooper, still their prisoner, was persuaded to corroborate her account in exchange for leniency. The judge immediately issued warrants for Harold Blackfield's arrest and dispatched federal marshals to Copper Creek. Within a week, News reached Helena that Blackfield had been apprehended, along with several of his associates. The evidence Kathleen provided, combined with statements from others who had been too afraid to speak up before, ensured that his days of terrorizing the territory were over. "What will you do now?" Judge Hollister asked Kathleen after the hearing that formally ended her marriage to Blackfield on grounds of criminal misconduct and abandonment. She looked at Daniel, who stood waiting by the courthouse steps, and smiled. "Start a new life, a real one this time." 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day in 1879, Kathleen Turner became Kathleen Hayes in a simple ceremony performed by Judge Hollister himself. Joseph Eagle and his family attended, as did Wallace from the trading post and several others who had helped them along the way. With money from the reward offered for information leading to Blackfield's conviction, Daniel and Kathleen purchased land near the Montana-Idaho border, far from Copper Creek, but not so remote as his cabin had been. There, they began building the ranch Daniel had always dreamed of, with a house that included the library Kathleen wanted. A year after their wedding, as they sat on the porch of their newly completed home watching the sunset, Daniel placed a hand on Kathleen's slightly rounded belly. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "After James died, I thought I'd spend my life alone, just existing." Kathleen covered his hand with hers. "And I never thought I'd escape Harold. When I ran that night, I was just hoping to survive. I never imagined I'd find happiness." "I'll always remember the first words you said to me," Daniel mused. "They'll hang me for leaving." "And you promised to cut the rope yourself," Kathleen finished, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I would have, you know," he said seriously. "I'd have done anything to keep you safe." "I know," she replied. "That's when I started falling in love with you, when a complete stranger offered to risk everything to help me." Daniel turned to kiss her forehead. "Not a complete stranger. I think some part of me recognized you from the moment I saw you running through those trees. Like my life had been leading me to that exact moment." As the last rays of sunlight painted the valley in gold so similar to the one where Daniel's cabin had stood, yet filled with new promise, Kathleen thought about the journey that had brought them here. From terror and desperation to peace and joy, from fleeing in the night to building a home in the light. "Do you ever miss your cabin?" she asked. Daniel considered this. "Sometimes. It served its purpose. It was a good hiding place when I needed one. But this," he gestured to their home, the barn, the corrals with their growing herd of horses, "this isn't a hiding place. It's where we belong." In the years that followed, the Hayes Ranch prospered. Their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Kathleen's mother, was joined 2 years later by a son they called James, after Daniel's brother. True to their dreams, they built a small schoolhouse on their property where Kathleen taught not only their own children but those from neighboring homesteads. Harold Blackfield received a 20-year sentence in a federal prison, effectively ending his reign of terror in the Montana Territory. With him gone, the region began to change, becoming less lawless as legitimate businesses flourished and corrupt officials were replaced. Daniel and Kathleen sometimes spoke of that night when she had fled from Copper Creek, marveling at the chain of events that had brought them together. They kept a coil of rope hanging in their barn as a reminder not of the threat that had once loomed over Kathleen, but of the promise that had saved her. "To remind us," Daniel would say when visitors asked about its significance, "that sometimes the greatest courage isn't cutting the rope yourself, but trusting someone else to do it for you." And Kathleen would smile, knowing that in finding the strength to leave her past behind, she had discovered a future brighter than she had ever dared to dream.